made it back from Florida, so we're back in Montana where it's late April and it's snowing and windy and absolutely wonderful out. There's no place I'd rather be. I'm gonna get back to work on the Corvette today, see if we can't get it to run right, and we'll go from there on the brakes. So, finally home. Oh yeah, that's the good stuff coming out. That's 20-year-old gas. If you don't know what it smells like, well, you're lucky. It's not pleasant. I think I'm getting a little high. I'm gonna get out of here and let it drain. While that drains, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this fuel line, and then I can pull this fitting and take the fuel filter out. I've got a new one to put in. Just pulled the fuel filter out. This filter's seen better days. It's definitely some nasty stuff that went through there. So we'll change it. Comparison, this is the new filter that's going in. That's the old filter. Finally got all the fuel drained out of this thing. We had a minor massive spill. And there's still a jug down there with, I'd say maybe a gallon. And we've got about 8 gallons outside, so maybe 9 gallons of fuel total. Anyway, that's cleaned out. We can go ahead and hook a hose up to the inlet of the fuel pump onto a gas can. And that's my cheater way of doing it. So we're gonna use the fuel pump off the car, but not the lines or the tank, essentially. So the only thing that could be giving us any debris is from the fuel pump and beyond. So we're gonna run and get some gas, fresh, new gas. Hopefully this thing will run then. So I fired this thing up and it kept dying on me. And I started doing a little look-in and I decided to go ahead and plug off some vacuum lines. So I disconnected this line, plugged it on the carb, disconnected this line and plugged it on the carb. And then I disconnected the brake booster, plugged it up. And then I just found this that's coming off of the manifold here, and it's not connected to anything. I thought this was maybe a non-return valve, but it blows through and sucks through just fine. So I plugged it off, and now it'll sit here and run. So I gotta try and figure out what this line is for, but in the meantime, I'll just keep it plugged. I'm gonna hook everything else up and see if it works. So I went ahead and hooked this vacuum line back up, the vacuum line over here, and then one of the brake booster, fired it up, and it's still running fine. So I think definitely this open vacuum line was causing me some problems. I will try and figure out where it goes. I know he mentioned the headlights don't work, and the headlight vacuum lines are all coming from over there, it looks like. So maybe this has something to do with that. I'm not sure. For right now, I'm gonna leave that plugged, and I wanna try and dig into these brakes and see if I can figure out what's going on with them. So I'll try and fix the brakes, fix that rear output shaft seal for the transmission, and then this thing should run and drive at least. And then we can decide what we wanna do with it. I went and pulled all 4 wheels off. 3 look good, dry, normal. Normal brakes. Nothing wrong with that. But the last one is all wet, like it's covered in brake fluid maybe. So clearly leaking. I am going to see what a caliper costs, because this one clearly is no good, and we'll go from there. I just decided that I would suck some of the fluid out of the reservoir so I didn't have to suck so much through. And when I went to stick the hose in there, I noticed that's nasty. So quite a layer of schmutz on top of the reservoir here. This is for the front, and then that other one's for the back. The back, actually, the reservoir doesn't look too bad. The front is disgusting. So I'm gonna fish all this crap out of here, and then I'll pump some of this fluid out, put some fresh fluid in, and we'll get it cycled through the lines. I got the master cylinder all cleaned out. There was actually quite a bit of gunk in the bottom of it too. I was just walking by and noticed a little puddle here. So initially when I looked at this caliper, I thought it was okay. When you look down in here, obviously I can't really show with the camera, but if you look at the actual pistons, they're leaking. So this thing needs a right rear caliper and a front left caliper. So I got both the new brake calipers, got them installed. When my wife gets home from work, I am gonna have her help me bleed them. So we'll get those bled up. And then right now what I'm doing is I'm gonna remove the little section of fuel line that goes from the metal line to the fuel pump. And then I'm gonna bring a piece of 3/8 fuel line, I'll bring it up, and then I'm gonna put this rebuildable fuel filter. That way we're filtering the fuel before it goes in the fuel pump. And if there's any junk in the tank or whatever, or in these lines or anything, we'll be able to clean it. And these are rebuildable, so I can change these. So I plumbed in the new fuel filter there, and I just zip tied it off and put a few gallons of gas in the tank, fired it up, and it's got clean gas coming through it. I don't see a lot of sediment or debris, so I think we might be all right. We might not have to clean out the whole fuel system, but we'll leave that in there for a while. I'm gonna go ahead and change the oil in this thing, and got a transmission seal to change. So she leaks pretty bad, and that's not great. I finally got a few minutes of my wife's spare time, and we got the brakes bled. That all seems good now. I am going to climb under and show you guys what's going on with the transmission leak, which is not what we initially thought. And it's kind of interesting. So initially I thought the leak was coming from this transmission output seal, which you may or may not be able to see, but it doesn't look like it's leaking. It's just leaking in this area. So I started looking at where the actual wet fluid was, and I determined that it was on the speedometer cable, and then right at that seam, you can't see it now because I cleaned it off, but between the tail shaft housing and the main transmission. So I sprayed it off with brake cleaner yesterday, cleaned it up real nice, and then coming back today, you can see that the only leak appears to be the speedometer cable. So I gotta look at some parts diagrams and figure out how that speedo cable goes in, if it's like an O-ring that should be preventing it from leaking. Anyway, I'm gonna put this thing back down on the ground and take it for a drive and see how it does. Would you look at that? The Corvette's sitting outside and she got there on her own. So I'm gonna hop in it, run into town and get a couple gallons of gas, and then we can test, make sure that everything seems good with it on the way into town. All right, it died. Let's try to keep from running into the trailer. All right, let's run to town. Made it to the frontage road. We can actually get up to speed now. Obviously this is not the car to take high speed on gravel roads, so we have to keep it slow. Now we'll be able to actually test how it does on the road. Seems to drive down the road pretty good. Track's pretty straight, so I think we're in luck. Let's go ahead and test the brakes. Oh yeah, pretty good stopping power, so I think it's safe to say that this thing is road worthy at least. What's going on? We took the Corvette out for the first test drive in 25 to 30 years. I don't know the full story on it, but I believe it was sitting since sometime in the 90s. So took it out, took it into town to the parts store, put a little gas in it. It ran pretty good. When it's cold, it was kind of sputtering a little bit. Once it warms up, it runs absolutely perfect. The brakes are working. They're a little spongy, but
I went and picked up the customer. She had never even ridden in a Corvette like this. She grew up seeing them. There was a couple of them around and she always loved them, but she never even got to ride in one. So I took her out for a ride, and then I let her drive her own car, and she was so happy. So I'm gonna check the fluids on it, see if I can't get the headlights working, and verify the leak on the transmission and make sure that it's just coming out of that speedo cable and nowhere else. And then I'll take the car back to the owners and let them enjoy it for a little while, and we'll kind of talk to them and decide where they want to go with it. And they were talking about doing an exhaust, so yeah, we'll do some different things to it, and we'll have it back soon to kind of modify it. And now we've got it running. Next, we're going to make it awesome, so stay tuned. All right, so I just started poking around, and I gave a little tug here, and there's our non-return valve. So that line that was coming off of the valve there, or the vacuum port, is supposed to plug into here, and I bet if we plug it in, we'll have headlights. So let's give that a shot. Okay, well, that explains something. My plug came off, so it still had a hell of a vacuum leak, and that might be why it wasn't running great when it was cold. All right, moment of truth. I got the vacuum hooked back up for the headlights. Let's see if they work. We have headlights. That was nice and simple. Now I'm gonna go drive it and see if it's hesitating or if I fixed it by closing that vacuum leak. Alright, so I lifted up one side of the car, that side first. Transmission seems dry other than the throttle or the speedometer cable. And then on the on this side I noticed this puddle. I had already tightened up these clamps that you can see, and obviously it was still leaking. So I started the car up and looked underneath it while it was on the ground, and there was just tons of liquid coming down this hose. So there's a hose clamp right there that I put the screwdriver on and tried to tighten up, and it just wouldn't tighten up. So took it off, and right where it should be tight, the clamp's broken. So switched out the clamp, tightened it up, and now we shouldn't have any transmission leaks from the cooler side. Just pulled the Corvette out of the shop, and it's running great. Brakes feel phenomenal. So I loaded up the 6x6 on the new 6x6 trailer. I'm gonna run it down and drop it off at the customer's house, and then I'll come back. They just live, you know, just barely over yonder. And then I'll come back. I'm gonna take the Corvette into town, wash it up for them, and go drop it off.